If your mess is your message, how do you know which mess and how do you package it to actually make it a compelling message that will bring in business? Sharing your mess is a strategy that only works for some people in specific industries, and it's often misused and ineffective. Keep watching for the top 3 questions to ask yourself to assess whether you should be sharing your story, and if so, which parts will bring you success within your business. So knowing what to talk about and knowing whether or not to share about your message often depends on your industry, because the thing is, you want to be conscious of how much you're sharing so you still sound credible, right? Like you might have a story, you have lots, let's face it, we all have lots of stories. We all have some trauma in our lives, right? But when is it appropriate to share and when does it take away from your credibility? And that's really the question that you have to ask yourself. Is it drawing people in a way that's being supportive and adds to my story, or does it take away? And I'll share with you, I've as a keynote speaker, I've been invited to speak on a lot of different topics in my life, and it's always different depending on your audience, right? They always say, know your audience. So there's times when I'll share certain stories because it's appropriate, and there's other times I would never share a certain story. Like I've spoken at some women's events that are more focused on personal development, and so it's better, it's okay for me to share more personal stories, but I would never share those same stories when I'm speaking on stage at a sales event, for example, because it doesn't have anything to do with that, right? And so knowing your audience or your clients is really important to know what part of your mess should come through your message. The second thing you want to ask yourself is, how triggering is my message? And I think when we've lived something for a long time, it's become less triggering to us, but it doesn't mean it's not going to trigger somebody else who's, maybe watching a video of yours, or who's, listening to you speak, or who's just connecting with you. And so, do a little bit of test or run it by trusted mentors. Like, is this too much to share? Or maybe if I'm going to share this story, it's within a certain parameter that's still safe and it's not going to trigger the people that are listening. So it's really, keying in on, how does this message land? How does it land with people who are around you? Is it triggering? Is it not triggering? And just doing that test with, people you trust. Third, to determine if your mess should be your message, ask yourself, does my product or service answer the question of how I got out of my mess? So in one of the messes that I talk about is the pain of starting my sales career. In the beginning of learning how to sell, I was a mess. It was very messy. I hated everything about selling. It was super uncomfortable. I didn't want to feel salesy. And, I just have a lot of horror stories of making sales calls and being hung up on, and the shame that I felt in that. And so when I launched my own company and I started to teach other people how to sell, it was really powerful and important for me to share my own messy journey of learning how to sell and just how painful that whole process was. And whenever I share the story, or I share nuances in that story, I always have people come up to me after an event or after a training session just thanking me, because there's this perception that because I'm a sales trainer, or I've been a sales trainer in the past, that I love selling, that I love the sales process. And my intention in selling was always about learning the fastest and easiest way to solve someone's problem or meet their need. And it was less about a sales process. And so I shifted my whole mess to solving the process of making selling easier. In fact, I love to make selling fun, and I love to make selling about the other person that you're with, your prospective client, not about you. Because when we get you out of the way, right, in the sales process, and you focus on the person who's in front of you, that can make selling fun. You're just there to solve a problem or meet a need. In fact, I went from believing that I was a pushy salesperson to saying I am a professionally persistent problem solver. And when I got to that belief, right, all of a sudden my mess had shifted, and my message was that I could help people all day long solve problems. And to me, that's what selling is. And that's what I was able to take to my clients to make selling easy for them. So you can see how that part of my life, that part of my mess, turned into my message. But there's other parts of my life that don't apply, or that I wouldn't share from a stage. And so again, knowing when it's in alignment with your message or how it solves a problem is really important. The other question to ask yourself is, if I share this message, will someone be harmed? And what I mean by that is, sometimes we have stories that involve other people, or most of the time our stories involve other people. And you really have to ask yourself, is it worth sharing a story, risking that relationship or risking how that might harm that person? And so I've been at events where I can think of one right now. I was at an event and someone was sharing a story about their life. And I thought it was so personal, and it included, people in her life that she outed. And for me, I just felt like it was too much, because if those people heard that message, they're still on the planet, they're not deceased, because I think that can be a little bit different, right? If they heard that, I could see how they could be harmed in a lot of ways. And I just made the decision that that's just something I would really want to avoid doing if I could. And I've tried to practice that over the years. So there's certain stories that I don't tell, or if I tell a story, I don't say who the people are, or I really try to protect them, because if I want to share a story, I don't want to sell someone out to share that story, or to bring to bring them into what is now my mess, because they don't need to be part of that, right? And so really think through that. And sometimes it's more about us needing to heal something in us, or to work on ourselves. So maybe we can share that story in a different way, or maybe it's just not appropriate to share that story. So again, feel into that. If I'm going to share the story, who am I outing? And is, could that do harm to them? Now, I will say that with this caveat, that doesn't mean that there aren't cases where this maybe is appropriate for some people, or, like what they're sharing included some really traumatic things that happened to them, and there's no way they can share the story without, sharing some obvious parts or some people that they've included. And of course, that's a very personal decision. So I'm not going to say never, right? But if you don't have to, or if it's not important to getting your message out, then I would say leave it out or leave them out. Ultimately, your mess should have a happy ending, right? Your mess should illustrate how you made it from the mess to the end result, and how you're able to do great things in the world now, and it's how it's led to your success. And that's the hero's journey. That's what most of us are sharing, is that here's where we were. Here's where I was in the sales process. I hated everything about selling, and today I'm training thousands of people around the world how to grow their revenue. Like that's my journey. My mess became my message. And and this is the end result. And it's also showing people that they can cross that bridge as well. Finally, really ask yourself, how does my mess apply to someone else? And why should they even care? Because what you don't want to do is get up and share a story that doesn't feel relevant to other people. I remember when I used to share my story, it was really long. And I had a mentor who worked with me. She's like, your story's too long. No one cares about all the things. So she's like, short, can you tell your story in a minute? And I was like, absolutely not. But she was right. And eventually I learned how to share my story in a more succinct fashion, but in a way that also applied to the people who were in the audience, because you want the audience, you want your clients, you want them to be able to see themselves in your story. And when they can see themselves in your story, they start to see how they can make that leap as well. As a professional speaker, as a keynote speaker, I've participated in a lot of live events. I've stood on stages. I've done a lot of speaking. I've been at a lot of live events, sitting in the audience. And I remember many, many different times, and one particular time stands out in my head where someone was sharing, they were leading the room, they were on stage, and they were sharing their story. They were sharing their story and, how their mess had led to their success. Unfortunately, in that moment, you could still see the mess for that, like for this particular speaker. And there was just all around them, and there were just a lot of things that you could see from what they were sharing, what they weren't sharing, how they were acting on stage, that they hadn't gotten out of their mess yet. Now, in their case, their mess hadn't stopped them from being successful, but for a lot of people in the audience, it was uncomfortable to watch, because they were coming from they took that message, which was part of their mess. It was clear that they were still kind of in the mess, and yet they were doing this hard sell from the stage. Now, a lot of people bought, they were caught up in the moment and they bought, but what I do know is that led to a lot of cancellations. A lot of people canceled after they purchased because they just felt like something was out of alignment. And that's where you have to be careful. You want to make sure, if you're going to share the story, that you've cleaned the mess up, right? And that you're on the other side of it, or don't share that story. To determine if your mess should be your message, ask yourself, does my product or service answer the question of how I got out of my mess? And here's the thing, oftentimes entrepreneurs will share their story, but there's not a direct link from their mess to their results and where they are today successfully. So you want to make sure that you show exactly how your mess got you out of your situation and got you to where you are today. So if you enjoyed Your Mess is Your Message, stick with me, because up next we're going to talk about how to do what you love so the money will follow. And remember, your 2X is waiting for you too.